hospital to work at because I thought I would be safe from such moral and ethical dilemmas like abortion, because who would think that a hospital named Christ could possibly be involved in such a thing? But Christ Hospital, I now know, on the southwest side of Chicago, was indeed involved in abortion. I found out by accident. I went to work one night in my capacity as a labor and delivery nurse and received two terrible blows. The first was finding out that the hospital was involved in late-term abortions. I heard in report that we were aborting a second trimester baby that night with Down syndrome. The second was finding out that the method of abortion that the hospital used, called induced labor abortion, sometimes results in babies being aborted alive, and if they were aborted alive, they were allowed to die without any medical intervention whatsoever. Now, to commit this method of abortion, the doctor inserts a medication into the mom's cervix, in the uterus up to the mom's cervix. When you're pregnant, your uterus is shaped kind of like a hot air balloon or a light bulb. And at the bottom is the cervix. It's supposed to stay closed until a mom goes into labor. But doctors insert this medication in the mom's second, early third trimester, so the baby's fully formed but very small, and this medication dilates the cervix, and what happens is the baby just falls out of the uterus. And that's how it comes to be that some of them are aborted alive. At Christ Hospital, if they were aborted alive, they were shelved to die in the soiled utility room if their parents didn't want to hold them and the nurse didn't have the time or inclination to hold them. They were never given a medical assessment after they were born. My experience at Christ Hospital that was that babies lived somewhere between a few minutes to one lived almost as long as an 8-hour shift. Now, to a person who believes that every life is sacred, this practice of eugenic abortions was abominable. But it was magnified in my world because the very place that these particular abortions were taking place was at a hospital named after my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. One night, a nursing coworker Amen. One night, one of my nursing friends was taking a little baby who'd survived his abortion to the soiled utility room to die. And when she told me what she was doing, I couldn't bear the thought of this suffering child dying alone, and so I cradled and rocked him for the 45 minutes that he lived. He was between 21 and 22 weeks old. He was about the size of my hand, and he'd been aborted because he had Down syndrome. And he didn't move very much because he was using all of his energy attempting to breathe. And I remember toward the end of his life, I couldn't tell if he was alive or not unless I held him up against the light to see if I could see his heart beating through his chest wall because their skin is so thin at that age. And after he was pronounced dead, I folded his little arms across his chest. I tied them together with a little string. I wrapped him in a shroud, and I took him to the morgue where we took all of our dead patients. And after I held that baby, the weight of everything that I knew became too much for me to bear. I had two obvious choices. One was to leave the hospital, and one was to stay and fight. And while I was praying and seeking counsel from my pastor and reading scripture, I came up on a passage that I thought spoke directly to me. It's Proverbs 24, 11 and 12. Josiah quoted it a little bit earlier today, but I have a little different version in my head. It says, "Rescue those who have unjustly been sentenced to death. Don't stand back and let them die. Don't try to disclaim responsibility by saying that you didn't know. For the Lord, who knows all hearts, knows you knew. And he will reward everyone according to his deeds." And so I thought, those are my marching orders. I was called to stay and fight. So I wrote a letter to the religious leaders of the hospital because I couldn't believe that they knew what was going on in the labor and delivery department just a couple of floors over their heads, but they knew. And as a result of my letter, I was called in for a meeting with my department superiors. And they told me that it would be a shame to lose me, but I might be better suited at another hospital that was more in line with my pro-life convictions. But I told them I wasn't going to leave. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew that I hadn't done enough to try and stop what was going on at that hospital. So next, my pastor and I alerted a couple of influential people and organizations and asked them to also privately appeal to the hospital, such as Cardinal Francis George of Chicago, who wrote a letter. But appeals such as this had no impact in the hospital. They said they weren't going to stop. And so as he told them he was going to do, my pastor wrote a letter to 70 churches and pro-life organizations in the Chicago area, letting them know what Christ Hospital was up to. And it was my pastor's letter that triggered the public outcry that went on after that. Before I knew it, the story was in Newsweek and New York Times, and I was being interviewed from one end of the country to the other. And then, according to God's perfect timing of events, a bill that had been in the works for a decade, called the Born Alive Infants Protection Act, came to fruition in the United States Congress. Someone saw the day coming when abortion would leave the uterus and we would now be talking about the merits of infanticide. And this bill simply stipulated something that we should all know, at least if we are abortion proponents, we should all agree that any baby who's born, no matter what gestational age, no matter wanted or not, the reasons for being born, was a constitutionally protected person. But pro-abortion proponents even argued against this. Some of them said that if a mom wanted to terminate her pregnancy and the baby survived the first attempt to kill him or her, that the mom should have the right to say that that baby should die after that baby was born. This is a natural next step of abortion. I've been asked to testify 10 times now in federal and state legislatures regarding babies who I knew were aborted alive at Christ Hospital. And one legislator that argued with me in committee was State Senator Barack Obama, who said, and he's on record as saying that giving these preterm born babies we're talking about, not preborn babies, born babies, that he said the same legal rights as full-term babies, would get in the way of Roe v. Wade, and it would overturn Roe v. Wade. So he voted 4 times against this bill when he was a state senator. But Christ Hospital has never publicly refuted my testimony because it can't. I was telling the truth. For instance, I told the legislators about what a support associate relayed to me of accidentally throwing one of these babies into the trash. She didn't realize that the baby was wrapped in a disposable towel next to the sink in the soiled utility room and accidentally threw the baby away. And when she was going through the trash, attempting to retrieve the baby, she accidentally dropped the baby on the floor. And and I was giving these testimonies, and I was participating in pickets at the hospital. I would literally picket the hospital and then go to work, prayer vigils. In the midst of all this, I continued to work at the hospital for another 2 years after I went public. I didn't like staying there, but every time I thought about leaving, Isaiah 8:18 kept coming back to me. And it says, I will wait with hope for the Lord. I am here with the children that the Lord has given me. I do not believe that there can be any such thing as coincidence. If the Bible says that not a sparrow falls from the sky without his knowing it, and that all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord, then we are all at this moment in time for a reason, in this geographical location for a reason. We may not understand the reasons that we're going through, such as you are in Ireland right now, but God never promises us that we'll understand, and he never promises us that life will be trouble-free. In fact, Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. But if we pro-lifers walk through our paths in our spheres of influence and don't want to make waves, don't want to be known as a pro-life extremist, in the U.S. we don't want to be put on the domestic terrorist watch list, then what kind of a witness can we really think that we are? I've been further shocked at the depths that some people will go to, people who called themselves Christians, to protect and defend abortion at Christ Hospital. In November of 2000, Christ Hospital unveiled its comfort room. So no longer could nurses take babies to the soiled utility room to die. They now took them to the comfort room. This was a small, nicely decorated room, complete with a first photo machine in case parents wanted professional pictures taken of their aborted babies, baptismal supplies in case they wanted their aborted babies baptized, and a foot printer and baby bracelets in case they wanted keepsakes of their aborted babies. You may not think that what I'm telling you could possibly be true, but I took pictures of that comfort room and I had them entered into congressional testimony, and you can Google Christ Hospital Comfort Room and the pictures will pop up. Father Frank Pavone, a priest for life, made a brochure about my experience and included pictures of the comfort room, and Youth Defense has a bunch of these brochures available at its table if you'd like to take one and see. Taking those pictures is actually one of the reasons I got myself fired not too long after that. Christ Hospital wanted me to quit long before they fired me, but I wouldn't leave. During those 2 years that went by, I was placed on a 1-year-long final warning twice, so I was on final warning the whole time. I had my picture cut up, I received anonymous hate mail, and one time the hospital CEO publicly posted a letter about me in the department in several places with my name highlighted in pink. But St. Paul reminds us that the battle really isn't here on earth. It's a battle in the spiritual world around us. And I also know that I'm on the winning side. The healthcare system that I worked for is one of the 10 largest healthcare systems in the United States, but I happen to know that 1 plus God equals the majority. I happen to know that I have nothing to fear on earth. In fact, God says in Isaiah, I, the Lord, have called you to do what is right. Don't be afraid, I am with you. Don't be intimidated, I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. But I do have to admit that life at work became more and more difficult, as time went by, as you might imagine. I began to feel like I was leading the life of a double agent, flying off to Washington, D.C. 1 minute to testify, and the next minute being so close to abortion that I almost couldn't stand it. And that final night, as I walked through the main doors of the hospital to work, and underneath the mission statement that's still there, that says in part, all human beings are created in the image of God. So the hospital knew exactly who it was aborting. It had no excuses whatsoever. I became sick to my stomach, and I said, oh God, how long are you going to make me do this? Well, it turned out God's answer was, not that much longer, Jill. This was August 31st, 2001, and when I went in to punch in at the time clock, there was my boss waiting for me, which is an ominous sign when your boss is waiting for you at 11 o'clock on a Friday night. And sure enough, I was terminated, and I was escorted out of the hospital with security guards. It was all very exciting. My termination even made Chicago Tribune and the New York Times, page 2. Just what I want to be famous for, getting fired. But what Christ Hospital did was blindside me that it was involved in the most despicable moral issue of our time. And as Owen said earlier, I think the most despicable atrocity against humanity since the creation of human beings. The Guttmacher Institute, which is Planned Parenthood's research arm, says that in the world, 1 billion babies have been killed by abortion in the past 2 decades. In the U.S., we lament 55 million babies killed since 1973, but we're just a small piece of the pie. 1 billion babies, 1/7 of our world's population. You name for me one other plague, one other war, one other tsunami, one other earthquake that could possibly match the human toll that abortion has wrought on our world, and I just don't think that you can. I think we are in the midst of the greatest human atrocity since we've appeared on earth. And my hospital wanted me to walk away from that. Well, I couldn't because I answered to a bigger boss. People come up to me and they'll say, Jill, I don't think that I could do what you did. And that makes me very sad. It makes me sad that I even stand out at all, because I think, do you not worship the same God that I do? The God who parted the Red Sea, raises people from the dead. Do you not believe the promises that the Bible makes, that if we're faithful to God, he'll be faithful to us? One of the promises that he makes is, no one who waits for God will ever be put to shame. I banked on that. And in my case, God came through pretty quick. August 5th, 2002. A couple days before that, I got a call from the White House. And it actually shows up on your caller ID, White House. And I was told that President George W. Bush was signing the Born Alive Infants Protection Act into law, and would I like to be present at the signing ceremony? And I said, well, of course, and I was honored to attend. And you may think, well, then these abortions have stopped in the U.S. These late-term induced labor abortions have stopped, but they haven't. As I said, it was a very small bill, a little definitions bill. It didn't have any penalties attached. President Bush found ways to try and apply penalties, but then he left office in 2008, and you can rest assured that our current president has no inclination to defend the Born Alive Infants Protection Act. But I do think that a corner has been turned on the world of abortion, despite all I said. Time magazine, in January 2013, on the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, ran this cover. 40 years ago, abortion rights activists won an epic victory with Roe v. Wade. They've been losing ever since. This is a cover of Time, a liberal publication, and it listed several reasons: pro-life laws, public sentiment, generational infighting. The older feminist pro-aborts are fighting with the younger feminist pro-aborts because there aren't that many younger feminist pro-aborts anyway, because they've all been killed. They're playing defense now. Science is on our side. Ultrasound, every scientific advance makes the case for pro-life. There's a stigma against abortion that will never leave, and aging abortionists. I want to touch on a couple of the reasons that Time indicated on why we are indeed winning the war against abortion in the U.S., and then a couple other reasons. We have, since 2011, enacted 205 pro-life laws. That is the dark blue bar on the screen in the graph. And just that is more pro-life laws passed than the previous decade, when only 189 laws were passed in the previous 10 years. In 2011, we had 92 pro-life state laws passed, which was the highest number ever of pro-life laws passed in the U.S. 2012, we had 43, and last year, in 2013, we had 70, which was the second highest number passed. Pro-abortion group Guttmacher Institute made a graph of the United States to show how the legislative abortion landscape has changed just in the past several years. So on your left, you'll see a map, and the dark orange states are those that the pro-abortion crowd considers hostile to abortion. The medium orange are middle ground, and then supportive were the pale orange. And you can see then on the right in 2011 how many more states they consider hostile to abortion. And this is in large part because we had a huge turnover of legislatures across the country, governors and General Assembly bodies, to Republicans, pro-life Republicans. So who you do elect is very important, as you now know. So we've had a great number of pro-life laws passed. Also, the number of abortions in the U.S. continues to decline. Our high in 1990 was 1.6 million abortions, and our low in 2011 was 1.06 million abortions. This is still a very high number, but also bear in mind that the population of the U.S. has increased since 1970 from 200 million to 300 million. So there are more women in the U.S. now having fewer abortions. And here's a rate that Guttmacher made as evidence. In 1980, the peak of women getting abortions was at a peak in 1980. For every 1,000 women getting abortions, 29.3. For every 1,000 women in the U.S., 29.3 got abortions. But in 2011, that had dropped to 16.9 women got abortions of every 1,000, which was the lowest number since abortion was legalized in 1973. So not only is the number of abortions declining in the U.S., but also the rate of abortions. And here's a huge one. The number of abortion clinics in the U.S. is just plummeting. The bottom is falling out of the industry. Yeah. In 1991, we reached a peak of 2,176 abortion clinics in the U.S., and the number of abortion clinics today is down to 759. That's a 65% drop. Just last year alone, 2013, we closed 83 abortion clinics in the U.S. And I'll mention that the number 759, we now have to take into account RU46 abortions. So of that number, 579 were surgical and 180 were medical or RU46 abortions, which is a real problem. Bloomberg News got it right. Why are these abortion clinics all closing? New laws, they said, are responsible for roughly half of the closures. Declining demand, which we just discussed. Industry consolidation. Crackdowns on unfit providers, I'll get more to that in a second. And all of these have contributed to the drop, they said. I would also add that 40 Days for Life is making a huge impact on abortion in the U.S. And I know you have it here in Ireland, am I right? In the UK? Yeah, 40 Days for Life, twice a year, they will have a sustained presence in front of abortion clinics, prayer being their foremost motive. But just being a presence in front of an abortion clinic, if you can imagine a union protest, in America, you know, when companies hire non-union personnel, the union will come and they'll stand in front of the company and they'll have a big inflatable rat. Do you have those here? Yeah. You know, to try and keep, workers from crossing the picket lines and from trying to keep people from going through and giving their business to these non-union organizations. That is just like it is with 40 Days. A sustained presence in front of an abortion clinic really deters women from going in for abortion. So that's been a huge deal in the U.S. Now back to this crackdown on unfit providers. I heard Gosnell's name mentioned here today, I think. Are you familiar with Kermit Gosnell, the case? Pretty much everybody is. He is a serial killer, the United States' most prolific serial killer, and maybe perhaps the world. He owned an abortion clinic in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and it was discovered in 2011 by accident. He was being raided by the FBI for writing illegal prescriptions, but then they found out the atrocities that he was committing in there because he had babies that he was keeping there that he had killed. And what he did was, he said he snipped the back of their necks after he aborted them. Remember the procedure I talked to you about a little bit ago? The induced labor procedure where you dilate the cervix? This is what the kind of abortions that he was committing. Just dilating the cervix, the babies came out. Whoops, if they died, he didn't just put them to die in the soiled utility room. Probably his whole clinic was a soiled utility room, but he would kill them by severing their spinal cords. He killed hundreds, if not thousands, over the course of 3 decades. So he was convicted in 2013 of first-degree murder of 3 babies that they found on the premises, and involuntary manslaughter of killing one of his patients. And so the discovery of Gosnell has had quite an impact on the abortion industry. States are now passing a lot of clinic regulation laws, and a lot of states who had these laws in the books but they weren't inspecting clinics are now inspecting clinics. And I have a feeling that a lot of abortionists are getting business now before they get caught. You know, they've got a lot of literal skeletons in their closet, and they want to just slink off into the sunset and hopefully have no one rat on them, you know, tell them what's been going on. One final evidence that we are winning in the U.S. is the polling. Gallup has been asking the same question since 1995, the very same question. It has never changed. With respect to the abortion issue, would you consider yourself to be pro-choice or pro-life? Now you see in 1995, 56, the dark green is pro-choice, the light green is pro-life. In 1995, 56% of Americans said they were pro-choice, 33% said that they were pro-life. And you can see over the course of years that the lines have been steadily, converging, coming together until 2009. For the first time ever, more Americans said they were pro-life than pro-choice. This was huge, 51%. In 2012, the lowest number of Americans ever, 41%, admitted to being pro-choice. 6 out of 9 of Gallup's last polls have said that there are more pro-lifers than there are pro-aborts in the United States. So you can see by all measures, we are winning laws, clinic closures, and polling, people who think, believe that they are pro-life. But we must fight on. Each and every one is critical to the battle. If you haven't gotten the message yet, what is it? Be the change. I'm not very good at math, but there are 4.5 million people in Ireland, right? And there's 300 million people in the United States. So correct my calculations, but in Ireland, one pro-lifer, I think, equals 650 pro-lifers in the U.S. Somebody tell me I'm wrong, but I think I'm pretty close there. Each one of you is a big deal. I received very good advice from Mark Crutcher of Life Dynamics early on. He said, Jill, do not rely on legislators, do not rely on journalists, and do not even rely on the church. You just rely on you and God. And Mark was right. If I let them, the media would almost always disappoint me. And if I let them, legislators would almost always disappoint me. And you've just experienced that here in the worst way, too. And if I let them, even people in my own church will disappoint me. But God will never disappoint us. God takes one willing servant and makes the most out of that opportunity. We are God's voices, hands, and feet for these helpless children. And the thing is, no one can replace the voice, the hands, and the feet that you own where you're sitting right now. Thank you.